are three foods, but they seem really random, but they're not exactly like that. These can hypothetically support a human, in a way, for his or her life, as these are comprised of four important molecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Though these might not be the healthiest of options, you can see what each of them has. Bacon with its protein and a lot of fat, candy with its carbs in form of sugars, and mushrooms, oddly, with its abundance of nucleic acids. First up are the carbohydrates, or carbs for short. These can be found in practically everything, and if it's sweet, then it has them. All carbs are made of three small building blocks, or monomers, and I'm going to use that word again, so remember. These are glucose, plant sugar, fructose, fruit sugar, and galactose, the precursor to milk sugar, lactose. By bonding together, sometimes even thousands in a single molecule, they form ones with increasing energy storages. As I said before, it seems that all have sugar involved, and that's very true. Sucrose, table sugar, is a disaccharide, one made of two monomers, glucose and fructose. Lactose is similar, which is glucose plus galactose. Larger sugar canes are called oligosaccharides and polysaccharides. The most notable polysaccharides are the two starch and cellulose. Starch is longer, short-term energy storage for plants, and cellulose, which is basically a bunch of glucose bound together, is the main constituent of cell walls. Oligosaccharides are smaller, maybe about 3 to 9 monosaccharides connected, and are primarily found on cell membranes for identification for other cells. As you can see now, carbs, like those you find in bread, are just bunches of sugar molecules bound together, forming all these foods. Note though, don't go recklessly eating sugar now. You might get a cavity and possibly diabetes, a condition where there is too much sugar in your bloodstream to be metabolized or stored. Animals do not have starch. They actually have another type of molecule known as glycogen, which has the same function as an energy storage. And also in insects, instead of cellulose, they have chitin, which is the main constituent for their exoskeleton. Next up are the lipids, enormous molecules, and yes, these foods right here have them. Remember this, lipids do not have monomers like the others, as there is no single structure for them. Lipids are a glycerol with fatty acids bound to them. And first, I'm going to talk about the fats, which are giant carbon-based chains that can be saturated or unsaturated. That just depends on the main structure, the carbon bonds. Here, saturated only has single bonds, and there's no room for anything else other than hydrogens, so it's saturated with them. However, unsaturated, on the other hand, has one or more double bonds, making the fat not saturated with hydrogens anymore, as there's now an empty space. Another lipid can be protection for cells. This would be the phospholipid, a lipid with a phosphate head and two fatty acid tails. The tails are nonpolar and hydrophobic, water-fearing, while the head is polar and hydrophilic, water-loving. I don't have time to go into detail, but the cell membrane is what allows the other molecules to enter. The final type of lipid I will be talking about is a steroid, and no, it's not the one that makes people all buff. There are those that form hormones and a special one, cholesterol. Most people know this as something that they have to regulate, and that's actually quite true. Cholesterol is found in two types: high-density lipoprotein, the good, and low-density lipoprotein, the bad. Cholesterol is always formed and metabolized in the liver. The only difference is that the LDL can block blood vessels, while the other does the opposite by transporting them to the liver. Now on to proteins. These are made of amino acids, molecules that kind of resemble this, with an R group representing what identifies them. When arranged into certain lines, different proteins are formed. They fall into four main categories. They are as follows: primary, single strands; secondary, two strands wrapped around each other; tertiary, two strands wrapped around each other then folded over again; and finally, quaternary, similar to tertiary except folded once more. An example of each would be keratin for primary, aids in the DNA for secondary, enzymes for tertiary, and hemoglobin, which transports oxygen and carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, for quaternary. An important type of protein that I mentioned before is the enzyme. These are special proteins that have a special zone on its structure known as the active site. What fits in is the substrate, the molecule in which the enzyme aids the catalyzing reaction of. The enzymes lower the activation energy, the energy required to start a reaction. Special aspects of enzymes are their names are derived from the substrates that they catalyze. For example, sucrase and ACE would represent the enzyme catalyzes sucrose. breaking it down into glucose and fructose, and that they are highly specific. Only certain enzymes can break down more than one, but mainly there's only one enzyme for one substrate. That's all I can go into this. And now for the major utmost importance, the nucleic acids. These are what comprise all information in all forms of life. They are usually found in long strands, either a single or a double helix, and made of nucleotides. Phosphates plus pentose, a 5-carbon sugar, and a nitrogenous base that gives them their names. The two types you might have heard of are DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid. The main difference concerning the lack of an oxygen in the pentose sugars, deoxyribose and ribose. Let's talk about the two types, DNA and RNA. You've probably seen this picture before. Watson and Crick, the two created a structure model of DNA. Ring a bell? Though I will mention, Rosalind Franklin and Ryan Gosling took a picture shown here. This was shown to them, and the two constructed a model from what they saw. DNA is the genetic code of life. There are 4 bases that could be on a nucleotide: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Only adenine and thymine and cytosine and guanine are how 2 nucleotides bond together according to the base pairing rule. DNA is always found in the nucleus of all eukaryotic cells, as well as in a large bunch in the center of prokaryotic cells, and is decoded to regulate cell activities. Another interesting fact is that the fact that DNA can be copied exactly for mitosis, the splitting of a cell into 2 identical daughter cells. However, DNA cannot leave the nucleus. Instead, there's a second nucleic acid that can send messages, as well as a specific function, the assembly of proteins in a ribosome, the RNA. RNA resembles half of DNA, a coiled single strand, but has some differences. First, instead of thymine, there's the base uracil, and instead of the deoxyribose on the nucleotide, of course, there is ribose. 3 types are responsible for protein synthesis and follow a very strict pattern. First, mRNA, the messenger, sends DNA instructions in triplets. tRNA, the transfer, reads a triplet code and binds with the appropriate amino acid corresponding with the code, as well as transporting it to the ribosome for assembly. Inside the ribosome, tRNA and mRNA match up, and the amino acids are bound together by a peptide bond. The last type is rRNA, the ribosomal, which, as the name suggests, makes up the ribosome. Now you probably know more about the organic molecules that are required to sustain our lives as to their functions, their types, and their structures. If you're still confused about anything, just rewind the video.